How's it going, guys? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. Look, I hate to do it, but I got to do the YouTuber thing. Like 80% of the people who watch this channel are not subscribed to it. So whether you're new here or you've been here for a while, help me out by subscribing and setting your notifications to all. In today's video, I've got 4 news topics to cover. The first one is that Sony just patented a DualSense that will heat up, cool down, and inflict pain. Second on the list, we're going to talk about how many PS5s have been sold and why that's good. Third on the list, we're going to talk about the best-selling game in May, and I don't think you're gonna guess what it is. And finally, Sony just hit back hard against Xbox by buying this franchise. All right, let's jump into the first news story here, which is all about Sony's latest DualSense patent. So this one's actually been patented before, but they've done more work and updated the patent and explained what this next-gen DualSense will do, and it sounds kind of awesome. So right now, we have haptic feedback, we have adaptive triggers. Those are very immersive, and honestly, they're the most next-gen features, I would say, of the PlayStation 5 outside of the few 60 FPS games we've gotten and everything like that. Like, I think that controller is very good. The only downside, obviously, is that the battery life is abysmal. But what if you were playing a game like God of War Ragnarok and, you know, you're in the middle of the map, the big center, like, hub world, and it's really cold there, right? And so you feel that underneath your fingers on the triggers and the sticks. But then you go through one of the portals into one of the hotter realms, and then you actually feel the sticks and triggers heat up under your fingers. That's exactly what Sony's patenting. And honestly, that sounds like a cool feature that I'm surprised hasn't really been done yet. But the craziest thing about this patent, out of all the stuff that they're going to add to this future controller, is the fact that they're going to simulate pain in the games you're playing, like in Elden Ring, if you're getting your ass stomped like I did on the bridge by that giant fat guy who rolls around and throws black fire. So like when that guy's beating my ass, they're going to simulate pain by making it go from really cold to really hot in like rapid succession so that it feels like a little bit of a jolt underneath your fingers. I think they should take it 10 steps further and just add full-on shocking so that, you know, if you suck or like hit the wall in Gran Turismo 7, you get a little shock. I mean, that would train people to be good at Gran Turismo pretty quick, wouldn't it? Like that would train the online expertly. You would stop ramming people immediately if you knew you're going to get jolted in the fingers. All jokes aside, it's pretty cool that they're updating this patent because it shows that that's a feature they're working towards. Another cool feature that they've been patenting is weight shifting. So I've talked about this before as being a cool feature that could be added to Gran Turismo when you're like scaling a corner really fast. You know, in a regular car, you would kind of lean to the right if you're turning left because of the way the weight shifts. And that's the one thing you can't really feel in racing games, even if you're using like a racing wheel or anything like that. So imagine if you're using this next-gen DualSense and when you take that corner super hard, the actual weight of the controller can shift from left to right as you take that left turn. There are actually a lot of different ways these features could be implemented and probably will be implemented because Sony's done such a good job this generation of sending people out from Sony to developers to say, hey, let us help you make the DualSense the best it can be with your game. And even third-party stuff like Jedi Survivor, for example, has DualSense features. So it's not like the olden days when they'd have features like the camera or something like that on the PS4 and like the microphone and the little speaker on the controller. Like, right, with those features, only first-party games use them like Ghost of Tsushima or Gran Turismo, but third-party stuff doesn't really ever take advantage of that. This generation with the DualSense features, Sony's done a great job making sure the developers actually use the tech that they put in the controller. So if they're going to add in heating and cooling, they're going to add in weight shifting, I would fully expect that to be taken advantage of by third-party devs on top of the first-party stuff, right? Like the first-party stuff I think will be the best implementation of those features, but if third-party developers just include those features as add-ons for the game, that continues to make the PS5 relevant, or even the PS6, because that's probably what this controller will end up being shipped with. That'll make that thing even more relevant and cool compared to its contemporaries over at Xbox and Nintendo. And I know this is just a patent, but I say this all the time when I talk about patents here on the channel. Sony doesn't patent things unless they plan on implementing them in the future. I mean, they patented the adapter for the PSVR 2 just a few months before it was even announced. So if we're seeing these features being patented and those patents are being updated with this heating and cooling sort of feature being described like at length by Sony, I would fully expect at least some of this to make its way into the PS6 controller. I don't know if they're going to call it the DualSense 2, but I personally wouldn't be surprised. But do you think this is like taking it too far? Do you think the pain simulation is too much? That's what I'm curious about. I think it's kind of cool. Like, obviously I don't want it to like cause damage or hurt me, but if it's just like a little bit of a jolt that's like, oh, I'm getting my ass beat right now, let me clutch up and lean forward like that meme, I think that could honestly be a pretty cool feature. Anyway, that brings us to our second news story here. We got the latest update on console sales from Circana, which is run by Matt Piscatella, and things are looking even better for the PlayStation 5. So last month, there was that news story going around that the PS4 was outselling the PlayStation 5, and then it was clarified that if you actually line up the amount of months that the PS5 has been on sale versus the PS4, the PS5 was around 6% ahead of the PS4, which, you know, is marginal for sure, but it's definitely not something to sneeze at, I would say, if you're talking about millions of units, right? Like, it's not just a few ahead, it's potentially millions of units ahead of the PlayStation 4. That's what we want because that shows growth in the world of gaming. So when those numbers came out, I was really curious to see the next month's numbers because you want to continue to see that to rise, right? You want to see the gap widen between the PS4 and PS5 because, again, that shows growth in the industry, which is ultimately good. And things are good there. So this month, well, it was May, actually. We got the data for May. The PS5 has officially sold 59 million units total, which is great. That's around, I would say, half of what the PS2 sold by the time the PS3 came out. I know it settled at like 150 million units or something like that. Sony obviously wants to beat that with the PS5 because they weren't able to with the PS3 and PS4. And if they can continue to widen that gap between the PS5 and PS4, I think they could maybe hit that number, especially if we start to see some of these huge games coming out that all their first party studios are working on. And just for context, the gap has widened from 6% to 8%, so a 2% increase. Again, when you're talking numbers, you're talking millions of units. That's actually a pretty healthy jump for the PlayStation 5. I would guess that that was a result of Helldivers 2 and Stellar Blade. Obviously, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth did not light the sales charts on fire, but those two games definitely did. And those are small games, right? Like Helldivers, I think, did far better than Sony ever thought it would, and that's awesome, but it's not really like this massive mega hit like something like The Last of Us or Spider-Man 2 would be. And then Stellar Blade, even though it only sold 1 million units only, it was still extremely profitable for Sony, and that's a good start for a new franchise, especially with, you know, games like that are from second party studios. They don't get the full first party treatment that Sony gives their games from Naughty Dog and Sucker Punch and everything like that. To see one hit 1 million copies, especially being a new IP, that's awesome. And of course, there's new live service stuff like Destiny 2's Final Shape expansion, which boosted the player base by quite a lot. You've got the First Descendant, which is just a shameless ripoff of Warframe mixed with Destiny. Like, there are full-on icons and weapons from Destiny in the First Descendant, but it seems like people are taking to that game and really enjoying it. And like I always say, I know it doesn't really ultimately matter how well the console is doing. Like, Sony made more money, yippee, but we want to see this thing continuing to grow because, as Phil Spencer always talks about, he loves saying the gaming industry is stagnant, like there's no growth there, but I think he's wrong. Because as Phil Spencer's always going on about, he's saying stuff like, oh, the industry has stagnated. There's only 150 million people who play games. He makes it seem like it's the same group of people from console to console, and clearly that's not the case because people obviously age out of gaming. So if there's always new people to replace the old people who are leaving the gaming industry and that number isn't going down, it's either plateauing or going up, that's what we want to see. We don't want gaming to go away, right? Like, we want it to stay as is or grow, and that's exactly what's happening based on these new numbers from Sony. So yeah, 59 million PS5 sold, nothing to scoff at. This thing's doing great, and that's even more of an achievement considering the dearth of PS5 exclusive games and the fact that you weren't able to buy it for like the first 2 years of it being out. I'm assuming that if you were able to buy it, like, they kept up with the production that they needed to make sure everyone who wanted one could get one. This thing would be even farther along than 59 million units, but like, considering everything they've had to go through, I think the PS5 is doing just fine. Anyway, that brings us to our third news story here, which is the top 10 games of May. I'm gonna read the whole list, but I was honestly shocked to see what the best-selling game of May was, and it was Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut, mainly because of the PC release that they just did of that game. And that's kind of crazy considering it's an old game. It's from, I think, like 2018 or 2019. Director's Cut is newer, obviously. That came out pretty early into the PS5 life cycle, but it's not really like a full-on release. It's basically like a glorified patch that they charge $10 for on top of the DLC, but it is cool to see this franchise that just started. It's a new IP, right? Like, it's the first game in this thing. It's totally different from what Insomniac did before with Infamous and everything like that, and even Sly Cooper. So to see it come out on PC and rocket its way to the top of the charts, that's kind of like unheard of kind of stuff we're talking about here. All this really spells out, in my opinion at least, is the need for a Ghost of Tsushima 2. Obviously, they want to get that lined up with the movie that's coming from the John Wick guy, so I'm actually very excited for that. A lot of people don't know this, but Sucker Punch is not a big studio. They're not nearly the same size as like Santa Monica Studio or Naughty Dog. They're not an indie team for sure, but they're not in the upper echelon of having hundreds of employees or anything like that. They keep things pretty tight, and you can kind of see that in the Ghost of Tsushima world. Like, it's very focused and small, but I think that works to the game's benefit. And so I feel like that's kind of why Ghost of Tsushima 2 is taking so long, but I would like gladly bet money that we'll see it announced this year, if not this year, next year, because it's been around 5 years and that's the dev cycle of most games. If they're not working on Ghost of Tsushima 2 and they're working on something completely different, they're nuts, because clearly this is a great franchise in the making. I mean, the first game was awesome, but imagining what they could do with a bigger budget on a sequel, it could get even crazier and be even more of the Japanese Assassin's Creed that everyone's always wanted, you know? And just for context, the second best-selling game of May is a remake that people have been begging for decades, which is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, and there are so many more people playing on the Nintendo Switch than there are PC. So to see a PC game rocket above a Nintendo exclusive from Sony, nonetheless, like, that's kind of freaking nuts, man. Like, this is really good for that franchise. And it even beat a Call of Duty game, because third on the list is Modern Warfare 3. Then you've got Helldivers 2 at number 4. So Sony's got 2 games so far in the top 10 of May. Helldivers still kicking along just fine. And then at number 5, we have another Sony game with MLB The Show, definitely aided by the fact that it's on Nintendo Switch and Xbox. I think it's on Switch. If it's not on Switch, it's going to be next year, but it's on Xbox and PS5. I'm really hoping for a PC version because I love playing sports games on the Steam Deck, and PC ports of sports games are pretty terrible, largely. Like, you don't even get the newest version of NBA 2K if you buy it on Steam. It's like what they used to do with the Switch versions of the FIFA game, where they just update rosters and everything like that. Number 6, Microsoft makes an appearance with Sea of Thieves, definitely aided by the PS5 release of that game, so Sony got a lot of money there. Number 7, another Microsoft game, not created but bought by Microsoft. We have Minecraft. And number 8, we have Elden Ring. Obviously, June is probably going to shoot that up the list thanks to the DLC, so it's good to see that game still selling healthily. And at number 9, we have Hogwarts Legacy. That game is just printing money. And then finally, another Sony game at number 10, Stellar Blade. I mean, Sony's absolutely killing it with game sales right now. It's just funny to see the top 10 games, like half of them be Sony games, but all we hear about from, you know, people on Twitter is that no one buys games anymore, blah, blah, blah. Clearly people are buying games because Sony is absolutely killing it. But yeah, I'm really happy with the Ghost of Tsushima port. It's insane to me that Xbox allows Sony to continue to run laps around them with their amazing PC ports, whereas Xbox is owned by Microsoft, the company that makes Windows, which is what you run PC games on for the vast majority of PC gamers. Like, I have nothing but problems with most of the PC releases that Xbox puts out, but all these Sony ones, outside of The Last of Us Part 1, which did eventually get fixed, but when it came out, it was a mess. They've been largely pretty damn good. So yeah, congrats to Sucker Punch. This is awesome news. Ghost of Tsushima is a hit again. Let's get that sequel and that movie out. I want to see that movie. Anyway, that brings us to the fourth news story here, which is that Sony kind of swooped Xbox in a really interesting way. So one of the biggest games this year that Xbox has had is Palworld, which I did not play the game. I saw it was early access, and I don't like buying early access games, but essentially what it is like if you took a survival game like Minecraft and mixed it with Pokemon and then also put guns in it. Like, you can make the Pokemon slaves and also shoot them with guns, which is pretty cool. I'll definitely give it a shot when it's out and on PS5. But yeah, Xbox got the exclusive on this. They released it through Game Pass, and now Sony kind of swooped them by buying not necessarily the entire rights to the franchise, but they partnered up with the developer to help them turn it into an IP with like cross media and other things like that. So think movies, comic books, toys, games. And this is crazy because you'd think Microsoft would want to continue the relationship that they have with this game, knowing how massive it was earlier this year. And this is kind of unlike Helldivers 2 in the sense that Helldivers really hung on for a long time. Like, it was constantly at over 100,000 players on Steam. There's still a lot of Palworld players kicking around on Steam for sure, but it definitely fell off quite a bit. But with that being said, I think it is a big franchise and it was smart for Sony to kind of get in here and potentially make some money off of it. We'll just have to see how the development shakes out. They just released a huge expansion for the game that adds, I guess, a new island and everything like that, so it doesn't seem like it's abandonware. Obviously, it would be awesome to have this game on PlayStation 5, but with this partnership between the developers and Sony, I can't imagine it's that far off, right? Like at most, I feel like Microsoft would have a 1-year deal, maybe even a 6-month deal. And if it's a 6-month deal, this game will be out on PS5 sooner rather than later, because I'm pretty sure Palworld came out in January, so they're already past that 6-month deadline. So yeah, smart moves from Sony. Xbox has been fighting dirty lately, so why not fight fire with fire and hit them back where it hurts? I think this is a great move from Sony once again. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you in this weekend update here on the channel. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.